Blue Jackets add an extra body, claiming Zach Aston Reese on waivers. Why didn't they claim more guys? We're going to talk about that on today's Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. Let's talk about waivers. A bunch of guys went on waivers yesterday for the purpose of trying to sneak them through to the AHL in preparation for the opening night roster. The Blue Jackets didn't need to send anyone down, which was great, or they didn't need to put anyone on waivers, I should say. They did send Denton Potachuk down, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But lots of teams ended up having to put a bunch of guys on waivers because teams can only carry 23 men for the opening night roster. So even if they don't actually physically send them to the AHL, they have to paper transaction them there because there can only be 23 players on your roster as of 5 p.m. Eastern today. So in 3.5 hours, 2.5 hours. Time zones are difficult. Blue Jackets roster was pretty much set. Essentially because they only had 13 healthy forwards. So it was going to be 13 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 2 goalies. With the addition of Zach Aston Reese. And again, we'll talk about why they didn't add more guys in a little bit here. But now, with Zach Aston Reese added, that gives them 14 healthy forwards, especially with Boone Jenner going on IR officially. And it sounds like he's going to be out for a significant chunk of the season, which really sucks. But now the Blue Jackets are going to have to make a decision. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well, because the opening night roster was basically set before waivers today. And now it is not. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about Zach Aston Reese as a pickup. This was a guy that a lot of people had said, yeah, this would make sense for the Blue Jackets to add. There was a couple of guys that I kind of had my eye on. Partially bias, guys I've covered in the AHL previously and have liked a lot. Jared Anderson-Dolan, I think, would have been a really great pickup. He's young, he's got promise. Obviously, he has moved around a little bit since being put on waivers late last season. He was originally an LA Kings draft pick, played with the Preds for a little while, was with the Jets, I believe. In this upcoming or this training camp preseason that just happened, he will be heading to the Manitoba Moose. He was unclaimed. Maybe biased, but I like him a lot. I like his game a lot. I think he would have been a good add. He's young. He's still under team control. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with him. Obviously, he's not going to be a Blue Jacket. And the other guy that I really wanted them to pick up was Jacob Pelletier, of the Calgary Flames. He was probably the best player to be put on or the most promising player, let's say, to be put on waivers. But they didn't claim him. They claimed Zach Aston Reese. There were no rules saying that they couldn't claim more than one person, but I guess they had decisions to make, So let's talk a little bit about Zach Aston Reese, who is the newest Blue Jacket. Doesn't replace the loss of guys like Jenner and Voronkov, who also expected to be out kind of longer term. No one is saying anything about what's happening with either of these players, which is frustrating, but I get it. The Blue Jackets have said basically that they're going to run a much tighter ship in terms of injury, etc. They'll be saying, okay, they're not going to be like, well, this guy's got a separated shoulder and he's going to be out for 6 to 8 months. It's going to be, okay, he's on IR for an amount of time, week to week, month to month, whatever. We're not going to tell you what the specific ailment is. Dmitry Voronkov, everyone knew it was his shoulder, was seen with a sling on at the OSU game yesterday or Saturday, possibly. I don't time zones. The time means nothing right now. But my guess is, again, potentially dislocated, potentially separated. He's out medium long term. Jenner, no one is saying anything about. I don't think anyone besides the guys that were like at practice have even seen what the injury was. He, I think, like took a spill in the corner, like lost an edge, hit a divot in the ice, whatever, went into the boards funny. Lower body is my guess. People are speculating that it's his back acting up again, which I really hope it isn't. But that being said, out long term, those are two players that, like, you can't pick up equal value to those players on the waiver wire. And you can't pick up equal value in a trade without giving stuff up. And I think, the fact that we've seen that the Blue Jackets haven't made trades yet means I think they are reluctant to do so. Potentially before the Jenner and Voronkov injuries, like, trades were a thing that they would potentially have been more interested in. It's a tough one, but it is what it is. They don't have the players to trade right now, and the team is probably going to be bad enough that they don't want to trade futures. Like, I could see them potentially trading depth prospects, guys that have maybe slipped out of the depth chart for consideration. I'm thinking potentially guys like Corson Kuhlmans, guys like Samuel Kanazko, who are both defensemen that I like a lot, but have really slipped down the depth chart. But then again, Cleveland's going to need those guys. If Cleveland doesn't want to ice an entirely ECHL roster, which I think, again, the addition of Zach Aston Reese means that one of the Monsters players that was pushing for a spot on the Blue Jackets will be going back down to the AHL, which helps. But, like, the Blue Jackets can't get Boone Jenner value back on the waiver wire. They can't get it back via trade. They can't get it back via free agent signing. They are doing the best they can and this has been true for, a month and a half now, is that they are doing the best they can with the worst possible situation, right? They were already struggling to replace the value lost by the loss of Gaudreau, and it still feels bad to talk about it in terms of this is what he was like, empirical on ice value. It still feels weird to talk about that because obviously that is so far from so many people's minds. Because, people lost their lives, parents lost their children, wives lost their husbands, kids lost their dads, but they were never going to be able to replace Johnny Gaudreau by the time the season started with players of equal value, and we saw that they brought in guys like James Van Riemsdyk, which was a signing that I liked at the time. And then obviously they wanted to add another guy. And then the injuries started piling up, Brindley out for a month or so with a broken finger. I don't know if he had surgery on it or not, but he had a giant cast on it at the OSU game, which does not bode super well for it being like a minor break. Then they lose Jenner. Then they lose Voronkov. Jordan DeMay is already injured. He was never going to make the team, but the injuries just keep stacking up. They're being super cautious with Caden Lindstrom, who was not on the ice at all, unless he was skating secretly by himself, where the media wasn't paying attention. He's still technically with the big club. He will be probably designated non-roster due to injury. And then he'll be going straight back to Medicine Hat as soon as he's 100%. Justin Danforth, hopefully, is closer than we would like. Than people are speculating him to be. Obviously, he had off-season, I want to say, wrist surgery. But he got cleared for on-ice stuff just before training camp started. Hasn't yet joined any of the team, but has again has been skating by himself. Has been working his way up to stick handling. Not going to be ready opening night, but hopefully will be back sooner rather than later. But like, again, Justin Danforth is not going to replace Jenner, Voronkov, Gaudreau, and even like Laine to an extent. I have liked Harris a lot in terms of what he brings to this team, but there's 3 top 6 forwards and Voronkov who could play in the top 6 that they now don't have. and you look at, again, we'll talk about the opening night roster in a minute here, but like I'm looking at the list of Blue Jackets players, and I'm like, okay, they have like 3 top 6 guys that are healthy right now, and that are going to be available soon, if not like are available right now, because like they're not getting Jenner back anytime soon. They're not getting Voronkov back anytime soon. Brindley, I think, is probably Cleveland bound. Like the additions that they've made, I've liked the Van Riemsdyk edition. I like the LeBanc edition. I like the Zach Aston Reese edition, which again, we'll talk about Zach Aston Reese in a minute here. I didn't mean to go off on this big tangent about like addition and subtraction of value or whatever, but like none of the guys that they've added are top 6 bodies, despite the fact that the 2 of them are playing and are practicing on the top 6 at the minute, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Probably not today because I think we're going to run out of time, but that'll be a something to talk about in tomorrow's episode. But they are, again, they're making the best of a bad situation. I like the Aston Reese ad. It's not going to move the needle in terms of offense. I don't think anyone's expecting that, but we'll talk about in a minute what he does bring to this team and why I like the pickup. So we'll do that, actually. We'll take a quick break. When we get back, we'll talk about Zach Aston Reese and what he brings to this team here at Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I've got to tell you all about Indeed. We're all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't actually to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. They are your matching and hiring platform. They've got over 350 million global monthly visitors and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. And it doesn't help you hire faster. 92% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. So it's not just fast, it's also better. And you can ditch the busy work. You can use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging. You can connect with those candidates. Again, faster, you connect with better candidates. And you can do it all on Indeed's platform. You don't have to, play email tag or phone tag or anything like that, which frankly is the worst part about job hunting, is trying to either be on call or responding to an email in time or anything like that. I have been unlucky enough to be job hunting in the past, lucky enough not to have to do it for a few years now, but when I was job hunting, Indeed was the only job that I used, or the only job hunting site I used, I should say, and I can only imagine it is just as good if you are hiring. Listeners of this show, here's the best bit. Listeners of this show are going to get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's finally talk about Zach Aston Reese, which is something I wanted to do in the first segment, and then the first segment ran away from me. But Zach Aston Reese played 3 games for the Vegas Golden Knights last season, I believe. I'm just pulling up his stats here. Played 3 games for the Detroit Red Wings, and I believe spent time in the AHL, was with the Golden Knights this training camp. They put him on on waivers to try and sneak him down to the AHL. Didn't super work, obviously. He played 61 games with the Grand Rapids Griffins last season, and again, his numbers, when you look at them, don't like stand out as like wow, incredible. Obviously, played 3 games with the Red Wings. Nothing happened there. Had 30 points in 61 Grand Rapids Griffins games, and then had 2 points in their 9 playoff games. However, they are not picking up Zach Aston Reese to score goals, despite the fact that this team needs secondary scoring. It needs depth scoring. I think they picked Zach Aston Reese up because he is an excellent defensive player. I am for my advanced stats stuff. I am using, as I often do, HockeyViz, which is a site that is run by Micah Blake McCurdy at Ineffective Math on Twitter, and is one of the best, if not the best, to do it in terms of advanced stats and microstats, etc. Zach Aston Reese is not going to create offense. He actually actively dislikes creating offense. However, he dislikes anyone else creating offense as well. And that means that he is very, very good in his own zone. He is solid on the penalty kill. He, again, is not going to score goals. He's not going to help anyone else score goals. What he is going to do is prevent everyone else from scoring goals. His 5-on-5 defense is almost 10% better than league average, which is great. And I think it's something that the Blue Jackets could really, really use, because a big emphasis over the past few seasons has been, man, this team couldn't defend their way out of a damn paper bag, and that's not just the defensemen, that's the forwards as well. Aston Reese is basically as he is a third line player, essentially, which I'm more than fine with. He's not going to walk into the top six. I don't think any of the players that they've given contracts to in the last kind of month or so should have walked into the top six, but apparently Kevin LeBanc and James Reeves are doing that anyway. But if you put Aston Reese on that fourth line, or even the third line, depending again on how your lineup is going to be structured, but like, put Zach Aston Reese on the fourth line with Mathieu Olivier and Sean Corrali, and tell them that no one is allowed to score goals ever. And I think that fourth line will turn into something that is, actually good at what it's supposed to do, instead of what it has kind of been doing for the past handful of seasons, which is mostly just kind of being given the term of a grinding line. If you're watching on YouTube, you will see my extremely dramatic air quotes there. But really, in reality, the fourth line of this team has been bad and has been outscored horrifically for basically since this iteration of the fourth line, and bringing in someone like Aston Reese to solidify that, to actually have someone that can play defense on that line, I think is a good thing. And it frees up one of the bodies that can go to Cleveland and make a difference as well. So if it was up to me, I'd probably send James Malatesta, and then have a third line of, I would have a third line of Mikhail Pucha, Cole Sillinger, and Kevin LeBanc. But it seems like the third line right now is going to be Mikhail Pucha, Cole Sillinger, and Kent Johnson, which in a vacuum I don't hate, but Kent Johnson fancially seems like an obvious choice, or putting Kent Johnson on that top line with Monahan and Marchenko, which is where Chinikov currently is. Anyway, we'll talk about the opening night. We'll talk about roster construction and lineups and whatnot in tomorrow's episode, because I do think we're going to run out of time here. I'm already at 17 minutes and I haven't talked about any of the things I wanted to talk about. But the short form of this is I like the Aston Reese ad a lot. I think it's a fairly savvy roster pickup. But I want to talk about why they didn't claim more guys, because like I said, there's so many guys on waivers today. That's how opening night roster day works. Is it's the last day of camp. You have to either paper transaction your guys down or send the kids down and then try and like sneak guys through waivers later on, or you just kind of hope for the best that there are so many players out there that GMs are not going to go through the entire list and do their due diligence on every single player. But why not claim more bodies is my question here. And I think the answer is, well, first of all, the answer is that GMs are cowards and they don't like to rock the boat by claiming guys on waivers, especially younger players like Jacob Pelletier, for example, who I am shocked that, if I was Don Waddell, that would have been my first choice. But also, all 31 teams passed on adding him. And you can't tell me that there are not 31 teams in this league that could use a player like Pelletier. He is young. He is promising. He was picked in the first round in 2019, I believe. Had a decent training camp with the Flames. Like, you're telling me that you couldn't use a player like that on your roster, and you're telling me that there are 31 GMs out there that are like, nah, we don't need a player like that on the roster, like, even just for flexibility reasons. So not claiming more bodies is mostly because GMs are cowards and they don't want to upset their friends, who are all of the other GMs, If I can make an extremely out of pocket reference, like, this is this isn't RuPaul's best friend race. Like, this is the NHL. You have to stop being scared of hurting your friends' feelings by taking a player that they like away, you know? But the Blue Jackets specifically, I think, why not claim more bodies is they are at capacity right now, and it kind of goes back to what I talked about in the first segment, which is they could claim 20 guys on waivers, and none of them will give them the value that they have lost through losing Gaudreau, Laine, Voronkov, Jenner. No guys of that caliber are available on waivers. You know, like, at a certain point, you're just claiming guys to claim guys. And again, there are guys that there were guys that were put on waivers that I personally would have claimed. You know, guys like Anderson Dolan. I would have claimed Samuel Fagemo in LA, who had 43 goals with the AHL this season. And if you can get 25% of that out of him at the NHL level, like, again, that's a great depth pickup. But no one wants to claim the good players on waivers, and it makes me feel a little bit insane about it. So I understand the logic. I'm frustrated by the logic. I like the Aston Reese pickup. What does this mean for the Blue Jackets opening night roster? Let's talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to talk to you about FanDuel, because it's America's #1 sportsbook for a reason, and it's also our #1 sportsbook for a reason, and here's why. You can start the season with a huge return on FanDuel. If you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can go to FanDuel.com, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the very same page where you place your bets. And here's the best bit. When you place your first $5 bet, doesn't matter what it's on, doesn't matter if you win or lose, doesn't matter anything. You could bet on, like, gymnastics or polo or croquet or NASCAR or wrestling, whatever you want to bet on. Put $5 on that, and you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, whether you win or lose. And all you got to do is, like I said, place $5, and those $200 you can spend also on literally whatever you want. So if you want to put money on the Blue Jackets winning the first overall pick, if you want to put money on, gosh, I don't know, Zach Aston winning the Norris, like, you can do all of that at FanDuel.com. Once again, that's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook, and also our #1 sportsbook here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Thanks for making us your first listen. Let's finish off by talking a little bit about what the Aston Reese claim does to the Blue Jackets opening night roster, because as of kind of this time yesterday, with the assumption that Boone Jenner was going to be going on IR, which they hadn't officially done until this morning, I believe, the Blue Jackets had 13 healthy forwards, 9 defensemen, and 2 goalies on the roster. I think they have actually 28 or 29 guys on the roster right now, but because so many of them are injured, 13 healthy forwards, 9 defensemen, 2 goalies. They solved the problem by sending Denton Matejchuk down to the AHL, which could be a paper transaction. You know, it could be a case of, okay, well, we're going to wait until everyone's kind of stopped paying attention, and then we'll try and sneak Jay Christensen through waivers in a couple of days' time. Who could say? Then they call Denton Matejchuk back up. But with the addition of Zach Aston Reese, now they have 14 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 2 goalies. So somebody needs to go, because I'm real bad at math, but that is 24 players, and they need to have a 23-man roster by 5 p.m. today. So what did they do? Looking at the players that they have right now, my guess is one of Mikhail Pucha or James Malatesta is due to go down. I'm just pulling up the lines right now. Like, Malatesta and Pucha are both waivers exempt as well. Dylan Gambrell is also there, but again, they need to put him through waivers. So my guess is he probably sticks around as an extra forward, unless, again, they like what they've seen from Pucha and Malatesta way more than they like what they've seen from Gambrell. That being said, I would rather, again, have Puccia or Malatesta playing in the AHL, playing minutes, than sitting in the press box, which I'm not even going to touch the defenseman at the minute, but it looks like both Jordan Harris and David Jiricek are on the outside looking in, which feels like wild mismanagement to me if you're going to have Jack Johnson in your top six. But we'll talk about that in tomorrow's episode because I'm going to run out of time. If I start going off about Jack Johnson now, then we'll be here until tomorrow. So, really, those are your three options. If you assume that they've claimed Aston Reese to put him in the lineup, one of Puccia, Malatesta, and Gambrell needs to go. My money is on Malatesta. It's because I think you keep Puccia on the third line. And again, this is not the way that I would have put the lines together. But right now, you've got Chinakhov, Monahan, Marchenko, JVR, Fantilli, LeBanc, Puccia, Sillinger, Johnson as your top nine. It's not an ideal top nine, but I don't violently hate it. I would move some players around, but as far as, again, when you look at the injuries, when you look at the personnel that they have, that's a fine top nine. And then I would put Aston Reese on the fourth line, send Malatesta down, and then have Aston Reese, Corrali, Olivier, and then have Gambrell as your 13th forward. That is my assumption. There is a world also where they decide to carry 14 forwards and potentially send Jiricek down to the minors, which I also wouldn't mind because, again, would rather have him playing in the minors than sitting in the press box in the NHL. So still some moves to be made, but my instinct is that it's probably going to be Malatesta that goes down to Cleveland, which is not a bad thing, but that will leave the Blue Jackets with 13 forwards, 8 defensemen, 2 goalies, and an opening night roster. Probably what will have happened is by the time I am done recording this and uploading it, they will announce the roster. Either it has been announced right now actively, or they will announce it 12 seconds after I hit the publish button on this episode. But that's kind of all I've got for today. Like I said, tomorrow I want to talk about the makeup, not the makeup of the roster, but the deployment of the roster. I saw some power play lines that I want to get into. Again, there are some players in certain places in the lineup that I am not super thrilled with right now, so we'll talk about that in tomorrow's episode. But I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening. You can find us on any podcasting app of choice. You can find us on YouTube. We're getting real close to 1,000 subscribers over there. So if you want to go ahead and hit subscribe, it'll help me out. You'll get episodes delivered right into your notification feed, which is a win-win for everyone. Thank you once again for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.